we're all sort of collectively staring off into the void, wondering what's on the other side of it. It's a giant question mark. Everyone's back at the starting line again. Everyone's sort of wondering, okay, so what's next? Instead of, waiting to see what's on the other side of this void, go build it. You have an incredible opportunity in front of you, a once in a lifetime opportunity to not just wait passively for the future, but be a part of creating it, especially now with tools that are capable of allowing you to build it at speeds that were just unimaginable even a few years ago.
Welcome to Data Talks on the Rocks. I'm Mike Driscoll. Back in 2017, Joe Reis predicted a shift beyond data-driven organizations to intelligence-driven ones. Systems where machines don't just inform decisions, but take actions automatically. At the time, he described this future as pretty exciting stuff. 8 years later, his tone is different. In this episode, we break down what Joe calls the great data engineering reset. A moment where AI shockwaves, industry consolidation, and collapsing tool chains have erased old playbooks and are redefining what it means to be a data engineer today. Let's get started. Joe, welcome to Data Talks on the Rocks.
Good to see you.
I think we'll just get into the topic that you just came off stage just a few minutes ago, fresh off of the Small Data SF event. You were there talking about the great data engineering reset.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about what you shared with the audience at Small Data SF.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. Do you feel like a reset button has been hit on how you work and how you think about the world and how you go about your daily life?
I'll say professionally,
yeah,
no question.
Right. And so I'm seeing this not only in data and tech, obviously. I think this is many careers. But it's something I've witnessed as I travel the globe talking to leaders and practitioners, is just a sense that we're all sort of collectively staring off into the void, wondering what's on the other side of it. And, it's a giant question mark, really. And so the notion really is, everyone's back at the starting line again. You are, I am, we're all back at the same starting line, each equipped with their own skills. But this seems unanimously to be the case for leaders and practitioners around the world that I talk to. Everyone's sort of wondering, okay, so what's next? And so the notion of the talk is really go through, sort of the past, present, and one alternate version of a future for data engineering. But I think the encouragement I'm providing people is instead of waiting to see what's on the other side of this void, go build it. You have an incredible opportunity in front of you, a once in a lifetime opportunity to not just wait passively for the future, but be a part of creating it, especially now with tools that are capable of allowing you to build it at speeds that were just unimaginable even a few years ago. And so it's awesome.
So it's a very positive spin on was clearly this feeling, I would say, of unease that some folks have. I think, I guess first the question, which I think we all know the answer to, but maybe I want, in your own words, what is driving the need or the requirement for this great reset?
Well, it's funny, right? So the reset happened when ChatGPT came out. But, if you talk to,
or the promise of a reset.
ChatGPT, I think was an interesting one where that was the first time that AI was really consumerized as an interface. Like, you've had phones that have had machine learning for ages with smart cameras and so forth, but it was the first time you could chat with something and get back seemingly interesting and sufficient answers. They used to be worse answers, now they're a bit better. And so then you started seeing a lot of money pouring in. So there's the angle of, I think, just experimentation and research, which it's still happening. There's the angle of a ton of money being poured into this. Interestingly, right as ZERP ended, this started. So you had actually high interest rates. And so there's no other story in the world. So that money falls into this now. And then there's just the promise of, the productivity gains that companies could get from this technology if or when it is able to, improve to some sort of fruition point where, either it enables people to do their jobs better and or companies are just like, well, we don't need people. And that's probably the stress you're talking about, the anxiety that people have. And I think it's rightfully so. But right now, the reset button is an interesting one where the capabilities that people have, like everyone has the same ability to have the same chat interfaces now, or the same access to the foundation models, right? Like you have the same one.
Coding tools.
We can tweak them a bit. Coding tools, et cetera, et cetera. Like I was talking to a friend, who's early at OpenAI last night, and he was saying he uses Cursor, and I'm like, well, that's cool. So do I, and probably you do too. And everybody has the same access to the tools, and so the ability to create things, the barrier to entry is just going down to almost zero, right? And so it's really your imagination.
If you look at the Reddit threads on, in the data engineering group, obviously where many of your readers, are active in that community, there's just post after post around folks who are, applying for a data engineering role, and there's 500 other applicants. And there, people talk about the DBT fear index. We can talk about that in a moment, of course. But just the AI fear index being high right now. What is your advice to the current crop of data engineers out there, and how they can best contend with this brave new world that we're living in?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it looks downright grim for where we are for now, right? And it's not just data engineers. It's almost every white collar profession has this existential dread. When I talk to even lawyers and people in marketing, they have the same impression that my job's cooked. And so I don't think I have like a sufficient answer to give people at this point. Everybody's having a tough time right now. And so the only thing you can control is what you can control. So that means, trying to put yourself in front of as many opportunities as you can, despite all odds. This means building your network. It means getting, as I half jokingly said, but I'm not really joking at all, you need to become, I hate to use this word, a content producer, but you need a way to differentiate yourself and get your ideas out there versus just blindly applying and shotgunning resumes and hoping that's going to get you the job. It certainly will not, because you're dealing, again, 500 applicants per job. I mean, that's light actually compared to, it's like I'm seeing thousands and hearing about thousands of applications per job in a matter of days, right? So and the problem is right now you're also competing against AI generated job applications. And so nobody's going to sift through that. Hiring managers I know are just absolutely just disgusted by it, right? So that means you're going to have to do things that AI can't, which means put yourself into opportunities where real humans are going to get to know you and can vouch for you. And that does unfortunately take time. And time is something you probably don't have when you're looking for work, but that's unfortunately the reality.
The other thing that you mentioned, I think in your in a recent blog post, maybe when you were flying over Greenland back from Helsinki a couple of days ago, but talking about maybe the relationship between the tool stack or the tool chain that folks work with, and the impact of kind of consolidation of that tool chain on what people are hiring for. And I think one of your quotes was don't fall in love with the tool, or don't be a tool.
That was the other one.
Maybe can you expand on that a little bit, and how you think sort of this consolidation that we're witnessing with, FiveTran, of course, acquiring first Tobiko Data and SQL Mesh, and then in a jujitsu or chess move, acquiring, SQL Mesh's much larger competitor, DBT, just a few weeks later.
Yeah, that was pretty punk. I actually just saw George and Tristan right when I was like leaving. I was like, I'll catch up with you guys in a second. But yeah, I think that, the other post that you're referring to is cash rules everything around me. In reference to the Wu-Tang cream track, excellent track. But it's the notion really was, at the end of the day, with tools, with vendors, it's great to attach your identity to these things, but you have to understand that once any project starts taking on investor money, the motivations start changing, right? DBT started as an open source project by a consulting company called Fishtown, and I don't think that they expected they were going to become a billion plus, unicorn and so forth.
I remember talking to Tristan, it wasn't that many years ago, before he raised, $222 million. And he said in a Zoom call, I think it was maybe right before the pandemic, that Fishtown had no intention of ever taking venture capital.
Right.
And then 6 to 8 months later, the game changed.
Oh, it did. Yeah, because it was funny. I remember because we were trying to become an early partner with their. I mean, we sort of implicitly were, but it felt like more because I had a data engineering consulting firm, and I think around that time, it must have been 2019, 2020, but they're like, well, we can hand off all of our sloppy seconds for our consulting business, and you can have them. And I'm like, that's a weird partnership model. Okay. But it was clear they're trying to make a move towards that. And, and I remember getting emails from, George and Taylor from FiveTran back when they were doing outbound, when they started it, right? So I was at a company like, we have a Postgres to Redshift connector. I'm like, that sounds pretty cool, but I already have one, so I don't need it. But what's cool is seeing the success, right? But, both of them took investor money, and when you take investor money, that money is sacred. And it changes the game. So
sacred to the investors for sure, and their LPs.
For sure.
Right? Comes
with
strings attached.
There's a lot of strings attached. Like you get, they're up here, and you get to, move your arms as they tell you to move them, and so that's what it is, right? And so I think that, and you can see the tension at events like Coalesce, where you go there, and the communities, so this last year wasn't this year's one. But even last year, the community definitely felt like there was a bit of a schism between the commercial offering and the community. But, and this year it felt like, I think I described it as a mix of kumbaya and concern, but this is sort of what you get into, right? And it's like, so back to the identity.
Or maybe this year might have been a funeral.
I don't know. I mean, I hope, I wish the best for everybody, and I hope it works out well for the people who use open source, use the paid offerings. I mean, it's like, this is just how the game is, though.
Right.
It's just, okay, you took money, like, yeah, you're going to play the game. And so that, again, it's cash rules everything at the end of the day. If you take the cash, you're going to have to play that game. That's reality.
And maybe certainly cash is a big component here, but I think there's another component of what the cash was chasing, which was, over the last few years, I guess, you and I have been in this space for a long time, and every time you think the data world is getting ossified or stale, there's yet another, kind of step function up of growth. And certainly in the last half decade, the chapter, was all about the modern data stack. And we had this Cambrian explosion. I know you and Matt Turk spoke a couple of days ago. There's the mad landscape, which is truly madness of, probably a couple thousand logos potentially could be on that landscape. We had this Cambrian explosion of companies in the, data ecosystem. And now we're seeing, I don't know if we call it a culling of the herd. We're certainly seeing, a wave of consolidation occurring. But beyond the venture capital being a component of that, what's behind that? Because we all know VCs. They're smart folks.
They're all brilliant. Yes,
right. Tomas and Matt and others. So they certainly saw something at the beginning of the modern data stack that led them to write a series of checks.
Sure.
I guess I'll ask two questions. What do you think they saw, and what arguably oftentimes they're following? What did they see in 2020 that was happening in data that led to these, investing in, all of these companies, DBT and FiveTran and, Great Expectations and the catalog companies and the new wave of databases? What do they see then? And what do you think they're seeing? What's actually going on now that that might be driving this desire to, okay, let's get our, I'll just say one of the arguments for why did FiveTran and DBT join forces, they share an investor. Yeah. And so maybe there's a group of investors who are looking to sort of consolidating their bets to strengthen those bets.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I remember, first started seeing some investment, back kind of pre-modern data stack era. Well, it's kind of interesting to put a date. I always date that back to 2012, but with Redshift. But regardless of what you want to say about it, like sort of towards the late part of the 2010s into 2020, part of it really was the attraction of the consumerization of data, really. And so, for the first time, any idiot like, myself could just go buy, a really awesome SaaS product, data tool or data or feature or whatever, even with a credit card, and bolt these all together in some sort of Frankenstack. But it just became dead simple. So you saw a lot of traction that way. Plus, I mean, you got to remember interest rates were low, then COVID happened and they got really low. And so there was just a lot of money chasing a lot of ideas, ideas. It was funny because I remember Matt Housley and I, my co-author, we were like, do we start a company too? I was like, yeah, but think about it, dude. There's like every Stanford grad, everybody who has a great looking, pedigree is in this game right now. And they're all competing on the same idea, chasing the same dollars. You really think this is a good idea? And they're getting crazy valuations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I intentionally stayed out of it. I'm like, I don't compete in those scenarios. It's like that scenario where I just stay out of it.
We saw some of those rounds where it was $100 million valuation on a zero revenue product, right? An open source product that was popular.
Yeah, but we'll get into that in a second. I think this is what we're seeing now. Eclipse is a lot of that, but you see those dynamics, and from a person like me, I'm like, maybe I'm just, maybe I just don't have the chutzpah for something like that. But I just felt like it felt very frothy. I mean, it's not my first bubble, probably wasn't yours, but and I remember actually a really popular investor in the modern data stack era. I remember she was saying, well, this is what 2021 actually. I remember watching a panel with her and it's like, well, this will never end, what we're going through. I was like, you should never say that. Don't do not jinx yourself. And sure enough, 2022 happened, rates go up. And we all know what happened then. Even towards the end of 2021, you start seeing some rumblings of that. But like 2022, 23 was like the culling. And so, anyone who raised those valuations are just sitting there like, shit, like, okay, now we have to customer shit, right? But it's like, and I'm sure you saw this too. Now you have to find interesting ways to justify your valuation that you probably shouldn't have had in the first place. But because there was people were investing in sight unseen. It's like, oh, you got a pulse in a modern data stack tool. Cool. Here's like $100 million. Right. So, but now you're seeing the same thing in AI, I think just at a much, much bigger degree. You got thinking machines that's at a $9 or $10 billion valuation raised two. You have SSI, Ilya Sutskever's, ASI bet that's at 32 billion valuation. Right. So that's, so whatever you saw in the modern data stack those are cute numbers compared to what you're seeing now.
Right. So, but and maybe we'll take on the AI topic in a moment.
Sure.
And certainly how that impacts, I think, everything, but certainly the data space where, I think certainly we're seeing kind of firsthand. I would just push, a little bit and ask, did we ever see, the modern data stack come to fruition? Was it a promise that was never realized, or, what went wrong in a sense? And where, where do we go from here? Like, I guess, to just ask the question, like, we have, are we going to have these democratic data stacks where you say, okay, I'm going to pick my, my ETL tool over here, and I'm going to pick my database over here, and I'm going to pick my analytics tool over here, or, which is a little bit of the modern data stack flavor, or are we kind of moving towards this walled garden set of stacks where you've got the Azure ecosystem, the Databricks, the Snowflake, and then potentially someone like FiveTran saying we're trying to get bigger and big and strong enough that we can offer another walled garden alternative to these players. So
sure.
What have you seen when you work with some of your clients, when you talk to folks who are the boots on the ground? Like, what are you seeing? The people build, every company needs a data stack.
Yeah.
Every company has got data engineers. How are they thinking about what those stacks look like?
At least for today, it's definitely consolidation. There's no way around it. The walled garden is the popular option because, a data leader and a CFO, I think, can come to an agreement that having dozens and dozens and dozens of tools probably isn't a good look right now.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to consolidate those offerings. So you got to pick a side, like, the Crips or the Blood, so to speak, Databricks or Snowflake. And so,
or the two, right? The two big gorillas on the
right.
stage.
Or Fabric, if you're Azure shop, especially in Europe, Azure is really big, right? AWS has their own offering. GCPs, I mean, they're all great. And I think the interesting thing is it's hard to find like a really crappy solution right now where it's like just that's a no-go zone. I mean, they're all it's very hyper competitive. So everyone's got a great offerings. I think it just depends on what you need. But it's interesting, right? So I was hanging out with Hannes Mulheisen last week, a good friend of mine. He's creator of DuckDB. And they have an interesting game where that's it's coming from Small Data Conf and with some other DuckDB related to DuckDB.
Top of mind, right?
Yeah, and so DuckDB is getting a lot of traction too from practitioners who just want to have the database on their computer doing stuff, but they're also seeing a lot of traction with the big hyperscalers. DuckDB is
right,
and so that's an interesting mix where, especially with things like Duck Lake, like what does it all mean? Because that's all open source. So you have this tension right now of vendor provided products, open source-ish stuff, Iceberg and so forth. And so I'm curious where that whole thing lands. But everything I view the entire universe as a pendulum, right? You had consolidation back in the cloud days, right? If you wanted a data warehouse, you're probably going to go to Teradata or some solution like that. Buy your X number of cores for some ungodly amount of money. I remember when Redshift came out, actually, that was November of 2012. So that was like 13 years ago. And that you could buy one DPU hour for like 25 cents. And that changed the game, I think. When that happened, I was like, that's interesting, right? Because it's 25 cents. It's pretty cheap, right? And so I think that was when I realized, okay, so you're going to see an ecosystem built around this. And the old ecosystem will still be there for incumbents, but it'll chip away. But you'll see a reaction to what's happening. I mean, that's just sort of the nature of software in this industry in general. It's consolidation, bundling, unbundling,
right.
blah blah blah.
Only two ways to make money
in
software.
Again. Yeah,
right? Bundling and unbundling.
The interesting twist, though, right now is the unbundling piece I think is going to happen in a different way.
Yes.
Right. So you got tools like Claude Code and all these other tools, which are still in their infancy. But what I see happening already is, and I had this epiphany when I was actually at Big Data London a couple months ago, and a month and a half ago, whatever, looking on the vendor floor and realizing, I was talking to my friend actually who has a tooling company, and he's small enough where he's like, we had to ask the question, how does AI kill us, and how do we reinvent our company?
Yes.
I was like, that's a great question. And he's like, a lot of these big companies can't ask that question. They're too big. I was like, you're right. And so, the big question right now is, you have big companies, but is that necessary in an age where you can just sort of chip away at creating the functionality you need for your business and for your use case? I'll give you a really pedestrian example. I recording a course, record courses all the time. I needed a teleprompter. I was tired of paying the $60 a year for the teleprompter app I had. I'm cheap. So I went to Cursor. I'm like, build me a teleprompter app, right? As I'm in the middle of recording my course, I'm like, let's build a teleprompter right now. Built it, use it. Say, okay, so I actually want the ability to do a few things, right? Refresh the web page.
What did you use, by the way, to build that? Which did you use Lovable or
Cursor?
A Cursor. Okay.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, I want, I put it on my iPad. I was like, I wanted to reverse the text for a teleprompter, but within minutes you had this functionality, right? And so then and as I've been building more and more with AI, any idea you have, you can just, create either a prototype or a solution that you can customize to your use case. So that makes me wonder going forward, what, I think the next era of unbundling is not going to be through projects or through vendors. I think it's going to be something different. And so this poses a kind of an existential question for if you're starting a company, what exactly does this mean? And that discussion I had with Matt Turk, I asked that, and he's like, well, if to him it's a differentiator between what do the foundation models do and what are they capable of versus what's the moat for a vendor.
That's right.
And this is only going to become more acute over the next year. So I don't know that we're going to have companies in the traditional sense that we had before.
Right.
The moats, the defensibility is eroding quite quickly, I think. So,
well, I guess to comment on that and then maybe follow up with the question is, it's clear that for the foundation model companies, it's clear what their moat is, right? A better model is a significant moat, right?
Oh, yeah.
Already we're seeing that there was all this talk of open source models like Llama and DeepSeek, and clearly there's a tremendous defensibility for right now Claude and OpenAI as having, the state of the art models that really do outperform. And I think any of us who work with these models, we see it, we feel it, right? When you choose your model, it has a significant impact on your productivity with, an AI tool, right? It's almost like hiring a smarter engineer versus, less talented, right? So defensibility clearly accrues to the quality of those models. Now, massive, amounts of investment. So no one can have a startup and build, another LLM, right? That train is left the station years ago. I think one would argue, and you talk about, on the application companies, that yes, the cost of software is getting driven, to zero. Creating software is getting driven, to essentially zero, which was never the case before. And so there's a concern of massive disruption of all these SaaS companies that do like a teleprompter app or
tiny example, but yeah.
But I think as data folks, I think one place we can all look to defensibility is data.
Right.
And so yes, I can build a lovable app or a cursor app that does a teleprompter. But if I want that teleprompter app maybe to be aware of, every other podcast I've done in the last 2 years, and understand maybe the vernacular, or my domain, I need to feed it that data. So it does feel like the companies that have found a way to, through data gravity, whatever we want to call it, whether it's Databricks or Snowflake, Azure, SAP, Salesforce, the companies that have actually created magnets for data, which is in some ways a form of intelligence for signal, they certainly still have some defensibility.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I was talking to my friend last night about it too. He's working on a lot of the cutting edge stuff with these models. But it's like, when we're talking about small data, he's like, that's what I work with all the time. I don't care about combing the entire internet. I want small, high quality data where I can, tune things, into that use case. So yeah, absolutely. If you have data, I think that's obviously a moat. Yeah, but it's interesting though. Like I'm again, we're still super early days in this. I am curious, like what the moats end up being. Because part of the talk I gave too was we're going to need new architectures. Architectures don't exist today, right? So architectures that support the discoverability and usability of the data that you were saying, right? So because now you're going to have thousands or millions of agents going out there combing everything and trying to make sense of data and use it. And it's going to require completely different ways of handling data that we just simply don't have today.
So maybe use that to segue and talking a little bit about the sort of the data stack and where there is, I guess, innovation happening and potentially defensibility. Clearly, the place where the most data lives today is object storage, right? S3, GCS, R2, and its equivalents, MinIO.
Yeah.
Object storage is, probably 10 to 100x, right? The volume of data lives in object storage than lives kind of at any other layer of the stack. Microsoft has made, a lot of noise about Fabric.
Yeah.
You were just talking about Duck Lake. Iceberg is clearly, the contender. We just saw that, even though Tabular was acquired by Databricks, Snowflake, and Snowflake attempted to make that, acquisition of the Iceberg team. Still, Snowflake is very much leaning into Iceberg.
Yeah.
I'll ask a general question, then a specific one. First, what are you seeing in terms of innovation at the data lake level, kind of broadly? And there's like a company like Bowplan that's out of New York.
Yeah.
There seems to be like a lot of innovation happening there. So maybe talk about innovations we're seeing there, and then I would ask about the storage formats. Right, Parquet has been around for a long time. DuckDB is making a big bet on Parquet. They continue to improve, but then we know Wes McKinney and his crew. The CMU group just had a paper a couple of weeks ago talking about FFF.
Yeah.
You remind me.
Yeah, F3. Yeah.
It's like the future file format, or future-proof file format. We see the folks in the AI world. We've got the folks who are working with like LLMs. Who's the name of the folks? LanceDB is another example of a file format. So clearly, data is a defensible moat
Yeah.
for the businesses that are lucky enough to have it. Data lakes are where most of the data is living, in this modern era. Object storage. What are we seeing in terms of innovation, in terms of data lakes and data lake formats?
I mean, mentioned a lot of the big players, right? So Iceberg, obviously. Valplan's really interesting. So I have an upcoming podcast with Chiro, but I can kind of give the punchline where he feels like they kind of accidentally invented an agentic data storage. So I think that's really interesting because everything's a commit.
Unpack that. Yeah, what does it mean to say, we can say agentic data stack, agentic data storage, like WTF. What is that?
Yeah, no, but it's one of those things where if you think about what agents are going to need and like what you want them, what you think that they need, at least they, so we're giving agents pronouns, but you probably want some way to have a commit history of what agents do with data. So if they mess up, you can roll back. Well, Valplan surprisingly does that natively, right? So I think that's an interesting one. Obviously, you can do that with things like time travel and Iceberg as well. But
a lot of the sort of modern Postgres databases support some of these features of kind of forking and time travel.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, so everything's a branch, right? And so it's interesting. I mean, when you kind of zoom out to what's coming next, I think that that these types of initiatives are going to support it. I haven't read the F3 paper, but I do know last year I was hanging out with Wes McKinney. We were in Malaga, actually, in Spain, and he was like, I really don't like Parquet, and I want to change it. And so this is interesting that this is what he was thinking of.
And what do you think is the big pet for those who are not familiar with, like, the why? There's this paper that folks can go look up, that the CMU group and Wes McKinney authored. But what would be your interpretation of the payoff of this F3 format?
Again, I haven't read the paper. I don't know much about what F3 is, but I'd be remiss to opine on it. But all I know is he just felt like something needed to happen with it. So that's all I can say. It felt crufty, I suppose, is the vibe I got. But then if you look at Duck Lake, that they're using Parquet, obviously, but I'm sure they could easily switch it to whatever they wanted. Sure. It's not that hard.
Sure. And there's a company called I think it's Spiral
DB.
Yeah.
I've only heard of them. I haven't checked it out.
So I think they're leaning into this format as well. My understanding of F3 is it can be Parquet compatible. It's this almost idea that you embed the decoding instructions are embedded in the format itself. So typically, we always sort of separated these things, but the idea is that you could actually have the file format be self-describing.
Yeah.
Which
that's super cool.
Which is a super cool thing, especially if you can make it performant. Right. Which is so I think there's some evidence the Spiral guys are talking about, getting, dramatically higher, compression rates or decompression rates. You can probably, in fact, kind of tune those trade-offs.
Yeah. But what the interesting tension though right now is if you go back to the big platforms and whatnot is, from what I can tell, at least anecdotally, I'm very curious about open source Lakehouse adoption versus just proprietary storage formats.
Yes.
Because a lot of data teams I talk to, it's there's a lot of people talking about using these formats, but I don't see a lot of people moving to them just yet.
Right.
Again, that's personal anecdotes. My mic but so we'll see what happens. But I think it's I think it's so super early days though,
sure.
Right?
It's like there's that quote. Iceberg is like teenage sex.
Oh yeah,
everybody's talking about it, but no one's doing it.
Yeah, from Dan Ariely sort of play on that the big data one, right? Back in the day. Yeah, it feels very much like that, and so. I guess we'll see where it goes, right? And also the big formats. I mean, so it's like multimodal data was the other thing I talked about in the talk. Where and I think this is obviously a big topic for every vendor is what do we do with images, text, and so forth.
Explain. I hear this term multimodal data format often, and certainly LensDB is positioning themselves in this space. What does that mean?
Well, it's about just making all your other data useful. So we us data nerds come to the world of rows, columns, or nested, objects, but there's this whole other universe of text, video, audio, images, and so forth. So like It's interesting too.
Is it just like the modern version of unstructured data?
It's all unstructured data, right? But what's interesting in that discussion is, it was actually Bill Inman, the guy who created the data warehouse. He became
Author of the Data Warehouse Toolkit, another bestseller.
Yeah, I think he sold like 1.5 million copies or something. So, but he's a really good friend of mine, and he was telling me, his kind of origin story. So he came up with the idea of the data warehouse back, I think, as early as '83. Publicized it sort of late '80s. That became popular. But he moved on, actually. He moved on to unstructured data because what he realized even back in the day, in the 90s, was, well, most of the data in an enterprise is not structured data. It's actually text.
Right.
How do we unlock that?
Right.
So you'd been working
back
on
then
that.
It was text, right?
Yeah.
Today it might be audio, video.
Yeah. And how do you relate all these things together, right? What's the lineage? And so that was something he was working on even back then, was the insight that, it's how do you unlock the analytical insights in his case? How do you come up with what he now calls textual ETL? And so obviously LLMs do a pretty good job. I mean, these are two different types of problems, really.
Sure.
The analytics of the data versus the, talking to your data. These aren't quite the same problems, but it was an insight that even back then, a lot of the data wasn't, just rows, columns.
Right.
And the other dark matter data, which was what I called the Excel sheets, right? Like that is the dark matter of data, is all these things that just sort of make the world go around that are not in the modern data stack at all, or in the lake house, right? Like, Bob's Excel report that runs the company, right? Like that is how the world works.
It's the KCD cartoon of the entire company being held up by that one Excel spreadsheet, right?
It's absolutely correct.
We've heard it. No one will admit this from the outside, but as a consultant, you have I would say, the privilege and maybe the curse of going into companies. Everyone from the outside will say their data stack is this pristine, well-architected thing, but you go in and you find, some CEO told me he took over a company, so we got in, they called it the sheet.
Yeah.
And there was one sheet that had all of the business metrics, all of the data was in this one massive Excel spreadsheet.
This is reality, right? So unlocking that data is going to be interesting too, because I think that's been always the bridge I've been very curious about, is, and this is what I talked about in my talk today, was this gap between, where we live in practitioner land versus, what I call dark matter data, dark matter companies, which is at 99%. So if I open up my talk saying, we're in SF right now. SF is a bubble. This is not reality.
Sure.
So don't pretend that the rest of the world understands what you're talking about here. And so, but it's also, that's sort of, where I think we need to come to some sort of a resolution stack-wise, and maybe AI helps unlock this. But it was Big Data London. I was running a discussion group with a bunch of CDOs and leaders of data. And what was interesting was, at one company they're using Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, and this one was like, people are just doing their analytics just sort of in the Copilot interface, but on data we have no idea what they're using at all right now. It's not governed. Right. It could just be Bob's spreadsheet, or it could be something that we don't even know about. But that's how people are getting their answers now. So I think we've all settled on let's chat with the chat box, but what's on the other side of it, you don't know.
Right. I mean, you could call it the dark matter of data. That's a somewhat kinder, some people might call it, sort of like the storage lockers of data, where the vast majority of it is sort of, the danger is it's garbage in, garbage out with some of the analysis that folks are doing. I want to move from maybe up the stack. So we talked about data lakes, and clearly we can observe that there's a lot of talk about Duck Lake and, Iceberg. And I think it's fair to, I would say it's fair to say that it's clear, even though the rest of the world hasn't caught on yet, but Iceberg has been adopted by some of the world's largest businesses like Netflix and Apple. And, to the extent that I don't think that Databricks made a mistake paying $1 billion for the Ryan and the Tabular crew. Yeah, I think Iceberg clearly is foundational, and Azure's making a bet there. But moving up the stack, putting aside the unstructured and multimodal, and dark matter data for a moment, we are seeing sort of still innovation happening at the database layer. We're seeing the continued renaissance of Postgres. on the rise. Neon got acquired by Databricks for $1 billion. We saw, I think just yesterday, Snowflake, announced, even greater support for Postgres. So we've got, Postgres continuing to, be on the march. We've got DuckDB, obviously tremendous, adoption of DuckDB, millions and millions of folks, downloading it, or agents or applications downloading DuckDB every month, if you believe Hannes and his numbers are right, which I think they are.
Yeah.
Then you've got ClickHouse that has been around for a while, and just a couple months ago raised at a $6 billion valuation.
Crazy, yeah.
From Khosla Ventures. They've got hundreds of enterprises using them. A lot of AI companies are adopting ClickHouse. I would ask, and then you've got a bunch of vector databases that are out there, some of which are struggling a bit. TurboPuffer, seems to be doing quite well. Object storage based. Why is there still room for innovation of all of the things,
What's under your chair there?
Okay, well, make sure. Of all of the, why are we still seeing innovation at the database layer? What's your perspective? It seems like, my gosh, by now we would have the relational databases and the OLAP databases we need. And yet we still see new databases coming onto the scene and growing in adoption.
I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I think it just goes to show, heterogeneity wins out at the day, wins at the end of the day. And so I think it shows that there's more diversity in the types of workloads people expect. And even fine tuning the existing databases for performance, right? Like that's a big thing too. I was walking around Helsinki with Hannes a few days ago, and he was telling me about just how even now they're optimizing at the assembly layer or assembly level for performance, where he's, certain operations they want to get at basically clock speed, which I think is pretty insane, actually. But that's the level of detail they're putting into this thing. So it's
and so maybe to put a fine point in the question, let's just say DuckDB. What would be your take for why is DuckDB so incredibly successful, so wildly successful when we had
Access? I'm kidding.
Access and Excel, right? And Google Sheets,
great database,
and pandas. I mean, we had a lot of things people could reach for: SQLite, Postgres, MySQL. Polars and data frame tools. Why suddenly has DuckDB become this, absolutely red hot cool kid on the block?
I mean, I think it just goes back to, a good user experience and word of mouth. But that's how pandas got popular, right? Pandas, I think Wes started that, during the Great Financial Crisis or something?
Right. 2010s.
Yeah. And that was more him scratching his own itch. I want Python to feel like Excel. And I don't even know if you knew that there were other data frame things out there like S and R, but but we could have stopped at R, I suppose, and not have done pandas and just but I just think it's one of those things where people always just want to scratch an itch and make something different, but it has to be something that people want to use. I think any data scientist has import pandas as PD tattooed on their forehead. Like that is like the face tattoo for, I have one right here. I'm just kidding. So yeah, it is interesting, but the popularity of DuckDB, I think, it's not like it's a new thing. It's been around. I think they started 2018, I believe. So it's not new, but it just gets better.
Right. It's certainly new relative to a lot of other tools out there.
Sure. And Polars, that's taken at least market share from Pandas. I think Pandas is still gonna be around for ages, but you have all these drop-in replacements now. Like you just do everything and just import this one library and so forth. So it's I think at the end of the day, it's about having a really good developer experience and people just talking about it like we are now. It's like when I see adoption of tools, it's that is what it is. Right.
The developer experience. And part of that, of course, is the ergonomics, the ease of use. I mean, I downloaded the recent version of DuckDB 1.4 yesterday, and it, the speed with, the lightness, that binary is 48 megabytes, comes down so quick. And the speed with which you can get your first DuckDB, prompt running is just, it's a joyful experience.
Well, they have a full-time person working on the CSV importer still, I believe. Like that's insane, right? But that's the kind of experience where if you think about it, it's like,
craftsmanship almost, right?
That's, it is. And it's the one thing where, okay, so CSVs are everywhere. Importing that should be a good experience. That's the first it's the first time you're going to be using it, probably getting data in. So it has to be great. And I think that's, it's a level of craftsmanship. And that was actually another part of my talk was, especially in this age of AI, I feel craftsmanship is going to be worth more because any of us, can make whatever we want now. The marginal cost of making another line of code is zero, but I would say it's almost negative in some ways because it's lines of code has never been a sign of success. It's always about how much do you actually like it or what's the utility of it. So I made the argument in my talk that craftsmanship and just loving what you do and making things a good experience for yourself and for others is actually going to matter more, not less.
Right.
And so
it's almost like the design, sometimes people call it other in consumer apps like design arbitrage. Like, once you make something possible, the next phase is to make it beautiful.
Yep.
You start out with the focus is functionality, right? Hadoop made it possible to crunch massive scale data, but it was by no means a joyful experience to run Hadoop. But Spark brought another layer, I think, of just ergonomics to that. So for sure,
even the pen you're using, right? I mean that's a Quaco, and it's a very nice pen. I could just get a Bic pen for like 5 cents and use that, but why would I spend $80 on a pen? Because I'm insane, but also I just like the joy of using something that's well crafted and just feels very nice as you use it. It's got heft. So and pens have been around a lot longer than databases, but there's something to be said for just enjoying the tools that you use.
So maybe that's a takeaway for the question of, advice for the folks who are thinking about starting data companies today. If they don't have a moat of a foundation model that they've spent, $50 billion training, or they don't have a moat of, a decade plus of collecting consumer data, maybe design and developer experience for data tools is a defensible entry point.
Absolutely. I mean, humans are at the end of the day, we're not data driven per se. We're very emotional and we use data to back up what we think is, but moving that aside, I started a publishing company recently for books. Why would I do that? Maybe I'm an idiot, but I think that actually people are going to want real human experiences, real things written by people. And they want to read that versus just endless AI slop. And, so the books I'm focusing on are the books that are going to help change the thinking of the industry, right? There's only be a handful of them, but I'm like, so it's all about just really good quality and things that people will probably want to read. But that doesn't go away. I mean, people are always going to want to, push themselves forward. Otherwise, I don't know, go chat with ChatGPT all day. It's kind of boring though after a bit. I mean, I chat with it all the time, and I think I reached an upper limit where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, right? I think I chat with AI more than I do with actual people these days. So.
I'm going to follow on that. We're one last chapter will take us of AI after this, but I want to ask one question, which you've obviously got a huge following in the world of data, and one thing you were blogging about was, how much you enjoy kind of going, around the world and meeting folks that are kind of data practitioners, the builders of these tools. You talk about, spending time with, Wes McKinney, the creator of Pandas, and hanging out with Hannes, the creator of DuckDB. And, there's all these people out there that you've met face to face by, traveling or going to conferences. What is it about the data community that seems like I've always felt that the data community of folks are just nice people.
Yeah.
And it feels different than other communities in technology that I've kind of intersected with. Like, what is it about the data crew? Why is that? What have you observed in your travels? Like, why is this culture of folks, particularly just nice?
I think it's just because we're a bit younger still as an industry. We're not as mature. I mean, we're not yet neckbeards, right? So you're not like
they're curmudgeon-y Unix, Unix admins.
Yeah, like throw the pizza under the door and just like you're chomping and groans. That'll be us in about 15 years. But for now, it seems it's still very young, and I think there's still a level of exuberance and support. But I think it's also like if you look at the nature of what data teams do, it's always been about supporting and enabling people. So I feel like that element is also a big piece of why this community feels maybe a bit more positive than if you go to like DEF CON or something where everyone's just like, trying to break your phone. So I don't think we're yet at the point where we're at zero-sum game thinking. I feel like it's still very much a growth mindset. But who knows? I mean, we'll see.
Is there something to be saying that, they say misery loves company, but also are data folks and data teams and data tools misunderstood by those who are outside of this community in terms of, what people thinks, what executives think a data team should do, or, it feels like there's some sort of shared insider knowledge that like we're not well understood by even today by the business teams or the business executives.
Well, I described it, in an article I wrote a few months ago as sort of the difference between like what I call enterprise land versus product land. And enterprise land is very much the internal facing cost center that we're traditionally associate with data teams, right? So, it's the business and then the data team. But the opposite end, product land is where data enables the business. It is integral to the business function, and there is no delineation between what data does and what the business is. And so that's, hopefully that continue. Hopefully, we move teams from enterprise land over to product land. So I think at that point you're playing offense and not defense over here in enterprise land. And so, but yeah, it's a hard one, right? It's sort of the classic office space scene with the Bobs, where they're like, "What do you do here exactly?" And you're like, "Well, I'm good with people." And it's like, I don't know what that means. Pack up your bags and have a nice day. But that's, but it's what I have seen change though is, for better or for worse, AI is focusing attention onto the data finally. Whether or not that sticks is ultimately depends on the success of these AI initiatives. But, when you talk to people in data quality companies and so forth, like it was hard getting calls returned, right? Like people, I don't care about this stuff. Like,
right.
Give me one reason I should care about my data being of high quality. These are serious questions, though.
Right.
Like, I got other things to do, like go use Bob's Excel reports to run my business, right? So, but now I think that's changing where companies are like, well, if we're going to incorporate this data into these models, probably want better data than worse data. And so it's got a big focus, and these vendors are getting their calls returned and getting, a lot of traction. So that I think is the interesting thing, because in the modern data stack era, you saw a lot of companies emerge that I could argue were either features or kind of a nice to have.
Right.
Even observability and quality, I would say, was in the nice to have category.
It was a means to an end.
Your company's not going to die if your pipeline breaks. You might be inconvenienced by not getting your reports, but your customers probably won't notice unless you're in product land, in which case they will certainly notice and probably throw a fit. But what I'm seeing now is definitely the change. Part of it is just thinking of data products. Just nomenclature's been around for a while. But thinking of data as a product thinking and so forth is becoming much more front and center. So I think that's a big change. But yeah, no, it's an interesting observation that you brought up, which is data teams and the business historically have been separated, right? And it's been kind of the cardinal sin. But again, I asked Bill Inman about this because he's I could argue he invented the industry as well. But he's seen this from day one, right? And he said it's just because you have to remember the data industry is still immature. Like we don't have established practices. We're still learning. Computing is even still a relatively new industry, and we're still figuring that out too. And so,
it took centuries for generally acceptable accounting practices, GAAP standards to emerge in accounting, for everyone can agree on what EBITDA means, right? But as Pedram often jokes about, like, have we agreed on what the definition of a customer is yet?
Of course not, no.
Right? Like, we're still counting customers and MAUs and DAUs, and we have very few standards.
What happens is you'll Google it probably and say, "Well, that looks good enough," right? Because that's the other. Because somebody had like a blog post that it was probably written by somebody who had heard it from another friend. Like, "Oh, that's how we calculate MAUs." Okay, we'll just go with that. Now you have ChatGPT or whatever, just giving you the same answer. Like, well, you should calculate MAUs this way, and now it'll calculate it however it feels that it should be.
And that would never be acceptable in the world of finance, to not have an agreed upon measure of, like, when someone says, how much revenue did we have? You hopefully don't give three answers to Wall Street, right? For what your quarterly earnings are. and say, oh, well, the finance team gave us this, but the data team had this other number, and the spreadsheet says this.
I feel like jail. That'd be good.
So, clearly the topic in all of our minds, I think the disruption that's occurring with AI, and it's changing everything, right? So it's the great reset that has started. We start the clock at ChatGPT being released, a couple of years ago. I think clearly the mistake that we don't want folks to make is just recapitulating the old world in this new world.
Yeah.
If you look in the early days, I remember in the early days of e-commerce, my first company was a company called customink.com. We made t-shirts on the internet.
Oh, nice.
The early folks who were doing e-commerce were trying to almost recreate a store on a web page. They're early virtual malls that you could walk through, right? So it was this kind of, looking back, it was like how clearly wrong that was to sort of reinvent a mall, in a web page, right? But I think the same holds true today, where we now have this incredibly powerful, general purpose, intelligent technology that we can bring to bear for data analysis. I think there was a report that said, I think data and analysis is the number fifth most popular use case for large language models.
Interesting.
1 in 3 knowledge workers who are using LLMs are using LLMs to do data analysis. So the question is, not just how can we build better dashboards with LLMs. The question is, what do you think? And there's probably early sparks of life out there, and you're on the vanguard. What are some early sparks of life for what could change with data analysis in an age of AI agents? What's different? For not just what could we do the same? What could we do radically different with this new powerful technology that's still kind of in its first era?
But you have to go through that, I think, because it's like, well, let's attach the old to the new and let's see if that sticks, right? Like, because every vendor a couple of years ago is putting the chat interface in front of the BI tool, and you can ask questions about your data. Right. Cool, super duper. But the data still sucked, and text to SQL was pretty bad back then, so the answers were just all over the place.
It still doesn't seem very good.
It hasn't really improved that much. But I'm writing a whole book on data modeling for a reason. But we talk more about that. But back to your question, though, it's interesting. So this is something I highlighted in an article. What I, again, beaten to death, the postmodern data stack, a term used forever. But in this case, I think it actually holds true, because you had modernism and you had a reaction to modernism in the art world, which was postmodernism, which is kind of the absurdity and the, just kind of a whimsical take on things, which I think AI does provide. But going forward, right, I think the thing I hit on in the article and what I hit on in my talk was you're moving. So if you look at what you're going to do analysis for, what is the purpose of it, right? Is it just because you like to analyze things? I actually do. It's kind of fun. But ultimately, you want to have some sort of an outcome or some sort of action. So I think
a decision,
yes. And the decision to do what? And then what do you do with your decision, right? So when this dawned on me was actually 10 years ago. I was at a startup, and a bunch of big companies around here were asking, can we get real-time dashboards? And I said, well, that's kind of a dumb question, actually. I can do that, but what are you going to do with it? You're going to have somebody sit there and just look at the dashboard until something happens, and then what are you going to do about it?
Put a human in the loop that just, takes action the moment the curve goes up or down.
Right. It seemed like this weird dopamine thing. So it's like, why don't you just tell me what you're going to do? We'll take an action on it, right? And then it dawned on me, okay, so I think that's where we're going to be going in the future, is really more towards action-oriented architectures, where, sure, if you want to analyze the data, terrific. There's some sorts of decisions where you can't take an automated action. Like you have to have, especially in high uncertainty, low information environments, which is a lot of decisions actually, right? You're going to analyze the best you can. But for the other types of decisions, increasingly it'll be action oriented. And so I hope that that's kind of where we go and that'll give people time to do the analysis that actually matters, right? But the crux of this is it's very fascinating. So we're trying to come up with these new ways of taking action on data and analyze it. But when you look at a lot of dashboards in companies, they answer about 80 to 90% of the questions that you need to run a business. And how often are they looked at?
Right.
So that's sort of the paradox we're in, is you already have the answers in front of you. You had them the entire time. but for whatever reason, you don't use that. So,
well, the definition of information is is surprise, right? And so when dashboards look the same every day, there's nothing surprising about that. There's no point. There's no additional bits of information if things are the same. It's when things are not the same that people want to know, do root cause analysis and understand why. I still feel that the challenge with some of these folks who think just about actions, and we're going to build, a real-time action, oriented piece of software is that it's a black box. And so
absolutely.
You need, we talk about evals and LLMs, you still need judges to evaluate the quality of those actions, the quality of those maybe software-mediated or software-enabled decisions. And so the moment you get into those evaluations, you need observability, you need dashboards, and you obviously can't just use static dashboards. You need the ability to sort of dig into the data and really get, a sense for the shape of it so that you can improve it. Ultimately you have to improve these decisioning algorithms that might be running.
Oh, absolutely. And an early version of this was credit scoring, actually, right? And especially when you're dealing with like sketchy loans, right? Am I going to get paid back? Right. And your feedback loop could be anywhere. Well, it's the duration of the loan. Did I get my money back over this time? So that's a bit of a gamble. You're actually seeing this in the auto industry right now with auto loans. So there's a record number of repos happening right now, right? And so, but I'm sure that everyone who had those models back then is like, we got this. We're going to make a ton of money off these models, off of loaning money to people for their automobiles and like 72-month plus duration loans. And that ended up probably being a really bad idea, right? And so, but your feedback loop is so long. How do you know? So I think the thing I find interesting about your comment and question is, and it's something I'm going to have to brood on. But I think the art of making decisions, and it's going to have to become more paramount because you have something that can make decisions on your behalf, and take actions on your behalf. How do you know that this is a good thing, right? And I think the part of it is the risk of the time span, right?
If latencies.
For sure, things can happen. You live in a very dynamic world right now that has very complex feedback loops, and so it's not the world of yesterday.
I think I would posit that businesses and the way that business intelligence tools will evolve will, I think, converge on the way that IT observability tools have evolved. You could argue that businesses, auto loans, and DoorDash deliveries. We have lots of examples of like Lyft, DoorDash optimizing for delivery times, right? Probably they outcompeted a lot of other companies by doing a better job being data driven and optimizing their not losing money on every transaction as far as we know so far. But I think that IT, certainly machines are obviously less complex than probably DoorDash drivers. And we have all of these tools. I think I read that 15% of IT budgets are spent on observability tools like Splunk and Grafana. You could argue that businesses, as they emit more signal, we want that same sort of business observability. And so there's still going to be a role for humans, looking at data every day. And to segue to the data modeling piece, the machines, I think, ultimately to make decisions, if we have software, they need features. And so it feels to me like the crux, one of the important elements of data modeling is how do we take large scale data that is just too much to feed into any algorithm and right size it and choose a set of features that can be decisioned on. Maybe give us a hint about this. You said you've got an upcoming book about data modeling. I think I saw, again, even in fundamentals of data engineering, you talk a lot about data modeling. I feel it's I don't want to break my microphone here, but I feel like it's a vastly underappreciated part of how we turn data into insights, decisions, and outcomes. What motivated you to maybe write this book, and what do you give us a hint of what people might take away from?
So it's interesting. We all model data implicitly, whether we like it or not, right? And so I think the motivation for the book was after I wrote this, I felt the data modeling piece was the thing I felt most uncomfortable with, where we wrote about it. I'm pretty sure people will read it, the concepts, maybe apply them. But what I notice is across, not just in data, but even talking about software engineers and ML and kind of the whole cross section, that the art of just thinking about data and how to use it was vastly underappreciated. And I sort of equated it, and I kept seeing some of the number one culprits I would see for a lot of mistakes and reasons I would even be called it in the first place is because your data was in bad shape,
Right.
poorly modeled, and that has ripple effects, right? If it's poorly modeled upstream, there's no guarantee it's going to get better downstream. It only gets worse. It's just the entropy, second law of thermodynamics. It's just
you can't re-inject signal after it's been lost. Right.
Yeah.
Once the signal's out of the system, it's like hard to recover it.
Precisely. So I feel like and I started writing that, but so it was interesting. So it's called mixed model arts, and so it's sort of like mixed martial arts. And so back in the 80s, I'm sure you grew up then. It was always kind of the question of, okay, so if like Bruce Lee and Hulk Hogan get into a fight, like who's going to win, or Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee. But it was very much this one-dimensional thing, right? Where it's the boxer, the wrestler, whatever, the karate man. But UFC one, I mean, that started putting, that was 1992, I think, in Denver, which you come to find out was actually an infomercial for the Gracie family, because they just got like their skinniest, scrawniest, dorkiest guy, Hoist, to beat up all these guys they handpicked. So it was an infomercial for jiu-jitsu, but what mixed martial arts started doing, and they had this in Brazil before, but like what it started doing is it started showing that you actually can't be one-dimensional. You have to have a cross-section of skills to compete in combat sports. And so people, if you were to fast forward today to your typical mixed martial artist, it's a completely different beast than the person even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so, but I feel like, if you take that same approach to data, it's actually very, very similar. In analytics, for example, there's always the one-dimensional, well, we do data vault or we do Kimball or whatever.
The one big table.
One big table, right? Or I called it WTF, like wide, tall, and full. But the notion is, okay, like we're going to just stick to our one approach and ignore all the other approaches out there.
And it's the one size fits all model. We're going to create the God model for our data. The God object is going to be the WTF table.
Sure. And then in AI, it's the same thing. It's like, or in ML, it's like, well, we'll pick, this classical approach. Like I'm only a random forest kind of guy, or I only do XG boost. And so, in software engineering, right now on operational systems, it's, well, what do you normalize or don't you normalize?
Right.
And so it's all these concepts all tied together, and they all form a very cohesive sense of the data universe in terms of the types of data and the forms of data we work with. Now you extend this to multimodal data, images, text, et cetera. But how do you apply these concepts? Actually, that's what we talk about. And so it's a very cohesive kind of the universe of data and how to work with it approach versus, I am only a Kimball user, an acolyte, and that's it. I don't feel that that's sufficient. Especially in today's world, where you're just dealing with so many different types of data, so many use cases, and so forth. So
and ultimately, the consumers of those models ultimately are going to be agents, and
yes,
and the humans that work with those agents. And so, without that layer of kind of modeling, it seems it's very hard. And this is why I think we talked about text. Why I think text to SQL sucks is that if I threw you into a Snowflake cluster and said, "There's 200 tables here. Hey, Joe, what's the revenue trend for the last, quarter over quarter?" And you're like, which table has revenue? Is it the sum of order price? And how do I exclude, refunds and, rebates? And, you wouldn't know, but once it's been modeled and, it's certainly a lot more amenable to, I think, humans and agents to derive, some insight from it. At the end of every Dad Talks on the Rocks, we're doing a last call where we ask you 5 questions. You'll get 60 seconds to answer them.
Okay.
So we'll start off. First question is going to be your favorite cocktail.
Oh, I'm a beer guy, so I don't really drink liquor. So, but I do like a tequila on occasions. So,
okay.
Yep.
Best bouldering location in the United States outside of Salt Lake City.
Oh man, Waco Tanks, Texas.
Light mode or dark mode?
Light mode.
City that you could disappear in for a month.
Tokyo.
Favorite LLM model?
Depends on the day. Really liking Claude right now, but these things change every week. So
I agree with you.
Don't get
I like
jealous.
that a lot.
Don't get jealous, models.
That brings us to the end of, I can't believe how fast the time went by. Joe Reis, author of, I'm going to do a live signing right here. Joe's going to sign my Fundamentals of Data Engineering book. I'm excited to finally have this on my shelf. It is great to finally meet in person, getting you fresh off the stage from Small Data SF. Thank you so much, Joe, for signing a copy of this book with this fantastically valuable ergonomic pen. And thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts with all of the listeners of Data Talks on the Rocks. All right. Yes.
So, Mike, thanks so much for the great chat. And thank you. Thank you for the great chat.
Hey, man. Yeah. Thanks for coming out.
Book.
This is great. Thank you so much.